I love the myths and legends and fairy tales of any kind, don't you? The imagination, the magic. I love the hope and the courage and the honor that oftentimes they stir. I like playing the Grinch. But despite playing the Grinch, I love to watch my grandkids immersed in Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Rapunzel, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Little Mermaid, Aladdin. It's cool. And how about things like the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis or The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien? Masterpieces. Things like Alice in Wonderland, Harry Potter. They're just fun. And I enjoy the myths and legends and fairy tales of Christmas, don't you? Ebenezer Scrooge in the Christmas Carol, The Grinch, trying to ruin Christmas till he encounters Cindy Lou Who. The Gift of the Magi, great story if you've never read it. Rudolph, the Nutcracker. Believe it or not, when I watched the kids at the Frankfurt School of Ballet perform the Nutcracker, it actually brought me to tears. It was imaginative and beautiful. And Christmas movies. Don't you guys love Christmas movies? I love them. Rocky IV, Rocky Balboa versus Ivan Drago. The showdown was on Christmas Day, right? Lethal Weapon, the second best Christmas movie ever made. And Die Hard, the very best Christmas movie ever made. Right, guys? Santa Claus, Christmas trees, Christmas lights, Christmas presents, Christmas dinner, turkey or ham. We're having beef, we raise cows. Christmas desserts, they're the best. I do have to admit, I really don't like most Christmas music. I think Christmas music ought to be banned before the 24th of December and banned after the 25th of December. I'm also a little suspicious of all these new Christmas traditions, although I'm not sure why we call them traditions when they're new. Elf on a Shelf, Santa's Little Spies, Mensch on a Bench for those who celebrate Hanukkah instead of Christmas. The North Pole Ninja Elves spreading kindness around the world. Yeah, right. Star from Afar, the Gnome in Your Home, and a Christmas pickle. Have you ever heard of that? That's ridiculous. A Christmas pickle. Still, I really do enjoy myths and legends and fairy tales. Even the myths and fairy tales that have attached to the Christmas story of Jesus. They're fantasy, but they're fun. You do realize that a whole lot of what we believe about the birth of Jesus is more fairy tale than history, right? Let's start here. On what day was Jesus born? Well, December 25th, right? Duh. Probably not. In fact, I think the odds of December 25 being the birthday of Jesus are significantly less than 1 in 365. I really don't care. It's as good a day as any to celebrate the second most important event in history. I think Easter was probably the most important event in history. Jesus followers, the earliest Jesus followers, didn't even celebrate the birth of Jesus for about 3 centuries. And they didn't turn it into a serious Christmas holiday until about 8 centuries. So why'd we just settle on December the 25th? No easy answer to that one. Earliest Christians actually suggested several possible dates. Some guessed March 21 or March 25. Some people guessed April 15. How would you like April 15 to be Christmas Day? All right? You'd probably spend a lot less, wouldn't you? Anyway, the church in Rome started celebrating Christmas on December the 25th in 336 AD under the reign of a guy named Constantine who made Christianity legal 300 years after Jesus. And I know some people are going to tell you, you're going to hear that we Christians simply stole a pagan holiday. You know what? I don't care. Pagans knew about the winter solstice, shortest day of the year for the northern hemisphere. By the way, this year, the winter solstice, the exact minute was last Wednesday, December 21st at 4:48 p.m. Did you know that? From then until June 21, we're going to add about 2 minutes of daylight a day. How cool is that? But the people back in the world of Jesus, they knew what was happening, and they knew the sun was coming back. So the Romans had a festival celebrating the rebirth of Mithra, kind of a sun god back then. Others connected with Saturnalia, a festival in honor of the god Saturn, which took place about a week before. the winter solstice. They'd party, they'd give each other gifts just like we do. Bottom line, I don't care. They celebrated their wannabe gods. We took it over to celebrate the real God. Fine with me. Why not? December the 25th? Probably not, but doesn't matter. Guys, we're not even sure what year it was, believe it or not. I mean, most people think that Jesus was either born in year 0 or year 1, right? And everything before the birth of Jesus is BC, before Christ, and everything after Jesus is AD, which literally means Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. And Jesus' birth is kind of the dividing line of time. It's cool. But the truth is, Jesus probably wasn't born in 0 or 1. Fact is, this Herod, who tried to kill Jesus as a baby, right? Scholars figure out today that he probably died in around 4 BC. He died around 4 years before Christ, we say, was born, which means that Jesus was probably born somewhere between about 4 and 7 BC. But it doesn't matter. You see, there was this monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus. Isn't that a great name? Some of you guys got to steal that for a kid. Dionysius the Humble. He lived about 500 years after Jesus, and he was the guy who created the Christian calendar. He came up with BC, before Christ, and AD, in the year of our Lord, after Christ. And bottom line, guys, he got the dates wrong. And bottom line, it doesn't matter. Birth of Jesus is still the second most important event in history. Jesus is still the turning point in history for every man, woman, and child everywhere for all of time. Do you believe that? Sometimes the myths and legends and fairy tales attached to the birth story itself. How did Mary get to Bethlehem? Someone guessed Uber. Not a bad guess. Most people will say she rode on a donkey, right? I mean, it's pretty much easy to see. It's on all of our Christmas cards. But the Bible doesn't say anything about Mary riding a donkey. All it says is that Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem. It doesn't say how. Could have been a camel, could have been a horse, could have ridden on a cart. Maybe she walked. I suspect she walked. I think they were pretty poor. 65 miles on foot, 9 months pregnant. How does that sound, ladies? I mean, seriously, do you think riding on a donkey 65 miles, 9 months pregnant is going to be any better than walking? And I don't care what guys think. Some guys don't get out of bed with a cold. But Mary was a tough kid, really a tough kid. Did you know that she was probably 12 or 13 or 14 years old? That's about what time they would get married back then. And it'd be different if Joseph had a Jeep or something, but to be honest, it doesn't matter. I don't care that they have her on a donkey. And then there's the part about Jesus being born in a barn, right? After all, you've always heard something like this. They laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Well, probably not. First of all, Bethlehem was a tiny little village, and the odds of it having any kind of an inn or a hotel are really, really small. Secondly, the word that he uses for inn probably meant something like guest room. Because back then, their houses were a little bit different than the houses in our day. Back then, most of their houses were simple, just 2 rooms, right? You'd have a main room where the family did all of their living. They ate and they cooked and they lived and they slept. And then there was another room that was attached to it, part of the same house, where they'd bring the animals in at night. Kept the animals warm, kind of kept the house warm, a little malodorous perhaps, but they got used to it. If people had money, they might have added a third room, a guest room, either on the same level or upstairs above the house. So believe it or not, the manger, which simply means a feeding trough, was probably in the house, a part of the house that was used by animals. The barn was in the house. And you got to know that back then people were extraordinarily hospitable, especially to family. Joseph and Mary probably stayed with family, and there was no room for them in the guest room, especially for a woman having a baby. So they let Joseph and Mary use that part of the house where the animals ordinarily were kept, probably after they chased them out. Does it matter whether Jesus was born in a stable, a barn, a cave, or a house? I don't think so. And then on our Christmas cards, Jesus is always surrounded by all these animals, right? In fact, the song tells us that. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. Is that not absurd? Really? Have you ever heard a cow lowing? I assume it means bellowing, mooing up close. They can make some noise. And if a cow started bawling next to a newborn baby, I'm pretty sure that baby's going to make a whole lot of noise too, right? I think away in the manger got it messed up. And our nativity scenes have these cows, and the shepherds bring some sheep, and the wise men have their camels, and there's Mary's donkey all crowded around the baby. Believe it or not, in some of the earliest Christian legends, lions and leopards and even dragons came to the birth of Jesus, bending their knees to the Christ child. Probably not. They probably chased all of the animals out of the house so Mary could birth her baby. Bottom line, it doesn't matter, because they're not the point of the story, are they? I mean, even the wise men. How many wise men were there? 3, right? That's what the song says. Do you know Matthew doesn't tell us? It just says these magoi, these magi, plural, came from the east looking for Jesus. Matthew tells us that they worship the child and present him with presents of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And we assume that that means there had to be 3 wise men. In fact, some of the early Christian storytellers even gave them names. And it wasn't the ones John suggested. They suggested Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthasar as the names of the wise men. Bottom line, we don't know. Could have been 5, 10, 20. Does it matter? And to call them wise men, I guess to some. But in reality, it looks like they were pagan astrologers or pagan priests. The kind of guys that a good Jew was supposed to stay away from. Why in the world would God invite pagan astrologers to the story of Jesus? And our Christmas cards always have these wise men right there at the birth. Probably not. I mean, look at the words of Matthew. After Jesus was born, after he was born in Bethlehem, during the time of King Herod, they came from the east. They went to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who was born king of the Jews? After he was born, they came looking for him. Weeks later, months later, years later. Eventually, they did make it to Jesus, but they weren't there when he was born, guys. But does any of this really matter? Does any of this stuff diminish the wonder and the power of the real Christmas story? People love to poke holes in the Christmas story. You Christians just took over a pagan holiday. So? Jesus probably wasn't born in December. So? You guys probably got the year wrong too. So? Jesus probably wasn't born in a barn with a weird star perched over on the roof and surrounded by animals and wise men. So, our kids are going to go to school and they're going to hear people try to poke holes in the story. You're going to go online and watch people try to poke holes in the story. You're going to watch specials on the History Channel that try to poke at the legendary accretions to the Christmas story. Okay. None of that matters a hill of beans. Listen, please don't let the myths of Christmas make you question the truth of Christmas. Right? I don't care about the myths of Christmas. But the truths of Christmas matter to every single one of us. And the truths of Christmas are wilder than any of the fairy tales or legends or myths. The truth of Christmas is way wilder than Santa Claus or the Grinch or an elf on a shelf. Have you actually let the wildness of the real Christmas story blow your mind? Think about it, guys. Listen to the way the Apostle John describes it in his gospel. In the beginning, he says, in our beginning, not his, because in our beginning, he already existed. He uses the term word, but we're going to find out that that word is a reference to Jesus. Before our universe existed, before time as we know it existed, the word, Jesus, already was, right? Because this word was both with God and this word was God. How does that work? Why would you expect God to fit into this tiny little brain? And then to make sure that you get it, he says it again. He existed in the beginning with God. He was already there. Then here's the next piece. God created everything through his word. This word, who both was God and who was with God, he is the one who spoke our universe into existence. Bang, right? And to make sure that you don't misunderstand, he says it again. Nothing, guys, nothing was created except through him. Which means this word is our creator. This word is your creator. This universe didn't just pop into existence on its own by magic. That wouldn't be science. That's crazy. God did it. And this word is God. And here's where it gets wild. Here's where it gets wilder than any fairy tale ever invented. Have you ever heard the phrase, truth is stranger than fiction? No kidding. The Apostle John tells us the Word became human. This Word who existed before anything else existed, this Word who created everything, including us, he became human. And he made his home among us. In other words, the Eternal One, our Creator, entered into our world, the world he made, through the birth canal of a teenage peasant. Get that? The absurdity of that is almost incomprehensible. A bewildered peasant teenager bearing what her friends and family would surely consider an illegitimate child. I mean, Mary was just 12, 13, 14 years old, just engaged, but she was scandalously pregnant. In that world, getting pregnant before marriage could actually get you dead. And there's Joseph, a blue-collar nobody, apparently buying her story that God did it. Would you buy that story from your pregnant fiancé? Even if an angel appeared to you and tried to confirm it to you? And there he was. The Son of God, the turning point in history, the touchstone of your life, laying in a feeding trough. There in this peasant's house, the Son of God, the Messiah, the Emmanuel, which means God with us. The Creator himself, dependent on a child to keep him warm, to clean his wastes, to carry him around, to swat away the insects, to protect him from the jabs of excited children. Guys, if that doesn't blow your mind, you don't get it. A courageous God, a God willing to show himself not as a raging whirlwind or a devouring fire, but as a baby. A God who is willing to be thought of as Joseph and Mary's mistake. A God willing to be considered a carpenter's kid. There's nothing wilder than the real Christmas story. Bible says that one bigger than the universe itself passed through the birth canal of a frightened teenager. Bible says the one whose days are numberless drew a first breath. It says the one who could rattle the heavens with a finger would flail his arms as a young girl rocked him. It says the one who spoke the universe into existence with a word lay there babbling and cooing like a baby. Seriously? The Apostle John says the Word, this Jesus, came into the very Word he created, but the world didn't recognize him. No kidding. Can you imagine what they would have done had they recognized him for who he truly was? If the owner of the house had known who the baby really was, do you think he would have let Joseph and Mary borrow his feeding trough? I think he would have cleared his house, then killed all of his animals as sacrifices to his God, because they did stuff like that back then. If the residents of Bethlehem had known that their Messiah had arrived, after all, it was the city of David, and their Messiah was supposed to come from the line of David, that's enough, but no one imagined that their Messiah would be God himself. Can you imagine what they would have done if they had recognized who Jesus truly was? Or would they have been as stupid as we can be when we get consumed instead with lights and presents and family? It's a wild story. It's an extraordinary scene, a scene that no human could have choreographed. A teenage peasant, scandalously pregnant, convinced by an angel that this was God's plan. She had to be scared to death. An equally scared, equally scandalized young man, without doubt disgraced, but convinced by an angel that his pregnant fiancée was still a virgin and that he was to stand by her. A master of the house, oblivious that he was looking into the face of his God, providing a feeding trough for his creator. Shepherds, misfits in that world, enraptured by the idea that God would invite them to the birth of the Messiah. And if they had known that this child was not just the Messiah, but their Emmanuel, God with us. Wise men, magi, pagan astrologers, pagan priests, but apparently God seekers, drawn to this place by a star, and somehow convinced that this child was incredibly a king. Have you guys ever heard the phrase, "He is the reason for the season"? Well, maybe that is truth from our perspective, but maybe there's a higher truth. Joseph and Mary are scared and confused, about to live a very hard life. And God whispers to them, "You are the reason for the season. It was for kids like you that he came." Owner of the house, oblivious that he's in the presence of his creator, and God whispers, "It was for guys like you he came. To be your Savior, to be your Lord, to help you find the life he created you for. You're the reason for the season." Low-life shepherds, pagan astrologers, and God whispers, "It was for guys like you he came, for you and yours, to point you towards God and to make it possible for you to connect with the real God. You're the reason for the season." And I'm serious when I say this, guys. God looks at you, every one of you, and he whispers, "You are the reason for the season. You're the reason I came into your world. I came to give you life to the fullest. Just embrace my son." And if you think about it, the story fits Jesus. It's so consistent with the choices that he made throughout his life. He spoke into existence everything that we see and know, and yet he chose to live among us virtually penniless. Go figure. As God, it says, the heavens were his footstool, and yet he chose to feel the pangs of an empty stomach, the throbbing of aching feet, cold and wet without shelter. As God, there were no unsolved mysteries. No human philosopher, scientist, or academic could ever pose a question to stump him. And yet he chose to present himself without distinction. No formal training, no degrees, no status. As God, he could have called legions of angels to do his bidding, even if he needed their protection or their obeisance, which he didn't. These mighty creatures would have willingly sacrificed themselves for his glory and his honor. And instead he chose farm boys and fishermen as his bodyguards and attendants. As God, he always has been, and he always will be. And yet he chose to taste his own blood, to feel his flesh torn, to struggle for air as his body screamed in agony. That's why he came. He chose to feel his life ebb away for you and for me. Guys, don't get so caught up in our Christmas fairy tales that you fail to look at what is really inside that feeding trough. Who do you see there? What do you see there? Do you care? I'm going to ask you to do is to stand with me as I read the real Christmas story. Here it is. Stand up. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him. There was nothing created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never, ever extinguish it. He came into the very world he created, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. Reborn, not with a physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but with a birth that comes from God. So the Word became human and made his home among us. full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. Would you be seated? Guys, the first Christmas may have been the second most deceptive event in history. He looked like a baby, and he was. He looked fragile and helpless, and he was, kinda. Who could have known that he was the Christ child? More than that he was Emmanuel, God with us. And who could have known that he came into the world to choreograph the single most deceptive event in history? How can God die? How can the Eternal One draw his last breath? Why would the Creator step into his creation to die for his messed up creatures? And there he was, hanging on a cross, dead. What more convincing proof could you have that Jesus had to have been an imposter? And then 3 days later, it was Easter. The single most important event in history. The reason that we are here this morning or this evening in church on Christmas. Where else could we be? The Apostle John said his life brought light to everyone. Light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Guys, there are candles around the room at all the worship stations. These candles represent Jesus, the light of the world. He brought that light to every single one of us, thank God. So this evening, we're going to do the Lord's Supper a little differently. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to come to the tables to celebrate Jesus, to thank him for what he has done for us. Here's how it's different. When you get to the worship stations, we want you to eat the bread and drink the cup right there. Maybe with a friend, maybe with family. We're going to give you a few extra minutes. And then when you're done with the Lord's Supper, we'd like you to pick up a candle. There's boxes of candles all scattered around the room. And we'd like you to light your candle from the Christ candle and take it back to your seat. While you're doing this, while you're celebrating the Lord's Supper, Steve and our worship team are going to sing a very special song. "O come all you unfaithful." It's a fitting song. And when we're done, we're going to close our worship with another great song. And during this time, guys, if you want to talk about making Jesus the Lord of your life or making Capital City your church home, I'm going to hang out right down here and just come up and let's chat. Right now, you're welcome.